afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Thursday, December 7, 2017 session in our series on the rise of space businesses in Asia. I'm Richard Dasher. I direct the U.S. Asia Technology Management Center, and we're very happy to be able to produce this series. This is the final session in our series, and I'm very excited that we have a great group to talk with you this morning, a panel discussion that in many ways kind of ties together a lot of the themes that we've been looking at through the series. With me in Tokyo is, as we move the camera around, Mr. Louis Pinault, who is a board member with Airbus Ventures, one of the investors behind the company that we're talking about today. Mr. Gyo Kawaguchi, who is the head of engineering for Infostellar. This is the company that we are going to feature today. And Mr. James Riney, the head of 500 Startups Japan, who is providing the office for Infostellar. So what we're going to do, also I should go ahead and say that joining us remotely from Fukuoka, Japan, is the CEO of Infostellar, Dr. Naomi Kurahara. So what I'd like to do this morning is to ask James to start off with just a few comments, and then I'll give the microphone over to Dr. Kurahara to really tell us more about Infostellar. And after that, then we'll have a panel discussion with Dr. Kurahara and Mr. Pinault and Mr. Kawaguchi. So why don't we start off? James? Why do you have a space startup in 500 Startups Japan?
Let me give you a little bit of background on 500 Japan in general. So we're a $35 million fund backed by Mizuho Bank, Nikon, also one of the Japanese government funds called Cool Japan Fund. And so, we are looking for basically across the board. So we don't have any particular sector that we're investing in. So we've done everything from, space to bioinformatics to logistics, SaaS. So we really have a broad range of categories that we invest in. Now, I wanted to give a little bit of context on some of the changes that we've seen in the startup ecosystem in Japan. One of the things that we've seen is that, when I started a company in Japan, the caliber of talent starting companies was very different. So, all the great talent that came out of University of Tokyo, Kyoto University, which are arguably the best universities in Japan, they tended to go to more stable career paths, like at Sony or Nikon or some of these traditional companies. But what we're seeing now is that a lot of that talent is moving towards startups, and startups are actually becoming a lot more popular. And so I think that's one key trend. We also seen a lot more top-down influence on entrepreneurship in general. So there's a saying in Japan that the nail that sticks out gets hammered. What we've seen is that it feels as if the hammers are actually clawing out the nails. So we've seen a lot of government initiatives, also big companies wanting to engage with startups, and a huge influx of capital into the market. And so we're pretty optimistic about the next 5 to 10 year horizon for startups in Japan. Another thing that we've seen is that there are a lot more companies now that are not just thinking about building a company domestically, but also thinking from a global scale. And so Infostellar is one of those examples. Obviously, space is inherently a global business, so they need to think that way from the beginning. But they've managed to build a very international team right here in the heart of Tokyo. So we've been very fortunate to be able to see that from seeding them and watching the evolution of building that team. So really excited to be hosting you guys and excited to have you guys learn a little bit more about Infostellar and what they're trying to do.
James, thanks very much. That's a great beginning, and again, gives us some great ways to start off. So I'd like to go ahead and ask Dr. Kurahara to speak. Dr. Naomi Kurahara is really becoming quite a media figure in Japan, if you don't mind me saying this, because InfoStellar is really attracting a lot of attention. And I think the best thing I can do is to just let you talk. Dr. Kurohara, you take the floor, if you will.
Thank you, Dr. Dasha. Hi, everyone. Do you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Great. So I share my screen. So again, I'm Naomi Kurohara from InfoStellar. I introduce it a little bit. So I started my career in university. I got PhD, and then I was working in University of Tokyo as a postdoc. I was working in the small satellite development project. Then I moved to a private company, Japanese office of Kratos Integral Systems. Kratos is a very big conglomerate company. And I was working as a system engineer for ground system. So the main customer was a geosatellite operator. During my career, I started to see somehow a gap in the space market. So number of satellites are increasing, and also communication needs per satellite is also increasing. And overall, the communication needs are dramatically increasing. However, supply side, the ground side, it remains relatively static. So I wanted to start. I wanted to do something, and also I started to see now startups, not NASA, JAXA, ESA, or big companies such as Boeing or Airbus. I'm sorry for it, but now I think startups are working on the front line for space industry. That's why I decided to launch InfoStellar. So we started a company in January 2016. We started with 3, including me, but now we have 16. And we increased the number. So we aim to bring Silicon Valley technologies and innovation into space industry. And also we aim to encourage the satellite development and the space business by lowering the ground side of the cost. By the way, I got pregnant when I was after a few months started my company, and at that time I was in the negotiation period of InfoStellar's seed round investment. You can imagine I had a very interesting time last year. So moving to our business model, our service brings the sharing economy into the space market. Typically, one ground station, one antenna, only use 3% per day. And the rest of the time is just not used. It is just idling. So by installing our service, Stellar Station, the rest of 97% of the time could be activated. So how? By installing a client to a ground station, a ground station connected to our service, the ground station network, and the satellite operator could access to an antenna via our service. To do so, we provide several functions such as antenna evaluation, matching, data processing, interfaces. By using Stellar Station, we will create largest ground station network. So on the end, I to our vision, long-term vision. So we will create deep space internet for spacefaring humankind, which means for example, we want to provide communication tool between Earth and Mars, or between Earth and Moon. So similar like we do teleconferencing between Japan and Palo Alto. So now this is the end of my presentation. I'm excited to have Luis and you here.
Dr. Kurohara, thank you very much for your brief comments. If I can ask a quick follow-through question. The Stellar Station is necessary because the different satellites are using different kind of communication frequencies, different protocols. Are you organizing those so that the one ground station can be used for multiple satellites? So that involves both hardware and software, right? Okay, and before on, can I ask you sort of a personal question? Is it hard to be taken seriously as a young woman with a PhD who is trying to run a company in Japan?
Personally, I think there is a good thing and bad thing. I studied at the electrical engineering department, and in my same year, we had 200 boys and 10 girls, so about 5%. And that's why many professors remember girls. So, and it happened in the industry too. So there is women, so people understand me very easily. So that's something good thing.
This small satellite development project in University of Tokyo is quite.
Yes.
Okay. So I'd like to ask some of our other panelists to say a few words. The first person I'm going to talk with is Mr. Louis Bernal, who is one of on the board of Airbus Ventures and has really kind of, I think, led the investment by Airbus into Infostellar. Louis, tell us a little bit about Airbus Ventures and why, how you see the rise of the space businesses in Asia and also Infostellar.
Sure, very good. Just a couple of points of clarification, Dr. Dash. So at Airbus Ventures, we don't have a board per se, but I am managing investment partner for Japan, for Airbus Ventures, and I am a board member of Infostellar as a result of our lead investment in this last Series A round, which we're very proud of and very excited. And just coming back to your last question, the comment you made, Naomi, the first pitch after our kind introduction from 500 startups featured Naomi's very young baby boy in a box on the floor while we were trying to understand the incredible merits of this. And the fact that she was able to convey what is so special and innovative and exciting for us about Infostellar was coupled with our complete conviction that she has all of the professional and management skills to balance her life in a fast-growing company. And it's a delight as we continue to get to know this growing little family along the way. So the fund itself, Airbus Ventures is a pretty highly autonomous fund, $150 million global fund. The fund is 100% owned by Airbus. So Airbus is our only limited partner, our only LP. We have agreed a set of investment theses with the Chief Technology Office of Airbus. And from that point, we operate with a lot of vigor and energy to return a strategic benefit to Airbus, but in a way that typically they wouldn't anticipate or do. So if the R&D or strategy or M&A groups were going to do it, then we probably wouldn't make the investment. So we're that much further out on the edge trying to stimulate the system. One of our investment theses includes deep space, as well as related theses spanning from AI to robotics to connectivity to cybersecurity, including quantum computing. And we found Infostellar's solution, the kind of system response, a iterative combination of hardware and software that we see as self-improving, that is set to shake The motherships are Airbus Mothership's own business in satellite ground networks, and will probably change the way that we can approach, that Airbus can approach its customers worldwide in the global space business. So it is an exceptional and exciting thing to meet Naomi and her team, to see that we would be able to bring something this exciting forward. And I expect great things. And when I look at the long-term vision, I suspect that we're going to see much more of a groundswell of new activity resulting within Airbus and within the space industry.
Thanks very much, Louis. Those are really good comments to kind of keep us going. Neil, I would like to ask you for a few comments now. Before joining Infostellar, you were with Google Japan.
Yes.
And you're head of engineering now for Infostellar. What made you come to Infostellar? Why would you leave Google for this?
To be precise, I didn't leave Google to be part of Infostellar, but I think it's a minor thing. I think I should start from a personal story. So, Dr. Dasha, you actually mentioned Astroscale before the conversation starts. My father is actually doing part-time job right now at Astroscale. So he's been in the space industry for, I think, more than 36 years. He's been on 5 to 6 satellites during his lifespan. And on the dinner table, I and my dad was just chatting. It would be really good if we could have a personal or home project to create. My family name is Kawaguchi. So basically build a Kawaguchi satellite and launch it. The reason being that the cost of manufacturing satellite is going very, very rapidly. If you have a few dozens of thousands of dollars, basically, you can build satellite, and with about the same amount of money, you can launch it using piggybacking of a rocket. So if you have some money to buy a little bit expensive car, and then you get to build satellite, you get to launch it. And then we came down to the problem of communicating with it. My father asked, okay, then how are you going to communicate with your satellite? Until then, I had no idea that the state of communication in the space industry is like you get to communicate with your satellite only 40 minutes per day. After 10 minutes for each pass, you have to wait 4 hours, 6 hours for it to come back. Okay. And then we said at that time, okay, we have to probably hold this and shove it. Maybe a few weeks later, I happened to know about this company called Infostellar, which is trying to solve this exact problem. And it happened to be in Japan. It happened to be in Shibuya, that's close to where I live. And I thought I have to go and see this company and meet the co-founders. And it was a very clear choice for me because what they're doing exactly bringing all the technologies that we have been developing in the web and in the cloud to the space industry. And so my personal interest in space and my expertise in the web and the cloud just made sense to combine at that point.
And would you say then, okay, I understand that it wasn't just you left Google for this, but you think that your work at Google has affected what you're doing with Infostellar? You were working on Google Maps before, right?
Right. So I was working on Google Maps on mobile, so the applications on the iPhone and Android that people use.
Okay.
But I think, yeah, it did definitely. I think a lot of the cultures that I learned at Google, that includes the culture of extensive code reviews, or the way that people set really high bar for hiring. A lot of the cultures that we liked about Google, we decided to bring to Infostellar. It happens to be that there are a few more ex-Googlers right now working at Infostellar. So that is also kind of accelerating the move of trying to make Infostellar another small Google in Japan that people feel where people can find very interesting technical challenges while feeling like the culture is very close to Silicon Valley and that of Google.
Okay. I think that what we'll do is move into the panel discussion part of this. I'll ask 1 or 2 questions to get things started, and then we will move on from to audience Q&A. When we do the audience Q&A, please raise your hand and let either Brianna or Pearl bring the microphone to you so that you make sure that we can hear you from here, okay? But first of all, let me ask, and I'll start really with Dr. Kurahara. What do you see as the biggest challenge for developing this new communications infrastructure for low Earth satellites? Could be a technical challenge or a business challenge.
I think both, but the more for business. Of the technology is, well, the technology side is, we have to do many things, but it's not something extremely difficult. So, but for business side, the space industry is very conservative, I say. So to bring the online service to the traditional space industry, that is challenge, I think.
So is it really the challenge that the current satellite operators just don't think about communications? I think it was an interesting conversation you had with your father, because this is critical to actually, what you do with it once you get it in orbit. Do you think it's just that the operators are not really focused on this yet, or does it have to do with moving the data more to the cloud? Are the satellites really not as cloud-based as you would expect? Either Dr. Kurahara or Gil on this one. Dr. Kurahara, you first.
Okay. So I have actually two challenges. One is communication technology in the space satellite developing team it's getting something black box. It's very difficult to find RF engineers in the space team now. So it is obvious because on the ground side, terrestrial service, the communication is something very mature technology. And everyone can use communication, like everyone can communicate to internet without any notice or without any contrast. But the satellite, but because of that, I think the RF engineers is getting difficult to find out. So satellite side, satellite development team, the only one or two experts usually there, and sometimes there is no expert in the satellite team. So often we go to the development team and we give the information for the communication. That is one difficult thing. And the second thing, so no experts there, but still the customer, satellite operator require the established communication. So communication is something, communication should be established. So there is no excuse to say we lost the data. So that is the first part. The InfoStella has to provide a very established communication service by using third parties antennas.
Gil, about this, especially the kind of slide that Dr. Kurahara showed about this kind of deep space internet ecosystem, what do you think? What are the challenges for getting there?
Oh, that one's like 10 years ahead. I think we need more discussion on the deep space internet. But I think we're taking a few steps that will get us there eventually. And I think you mentioned that your question about the cloud and the space industry. And I think it's fair to say that it's really rare to hear the word cloud or the web when you go to conferences where the industries of the satellites and the other space people come. I think it's slightly starting to change. I started to hear companies like Google and other companies. But I think the reason was because maybe 5 to 10 years ago, a lot of the satellite development costed, for example, like hundreds of millions of dollars. And at that point, it made sense to have one antenna for one satellite. The antenna's cost was a lot cheaper than the satellite. Now the equation is basically reversing. The cost of having an antenna is actually more than making and operating one satellite. And people started to talk about the question of how to scale this. And I think the whole cloud solution is there to scale things. And there was no need to do that 5 to 10 years ago. But I think it is now. And I think we were at the right timing to start this company and to solve the problem.
Okay. I have one more kind of sort of technical sort of question, actually more of a policy question. And then I have a request for Dr. Cano's opinions about space in general in Asia. But before we get there, several speakers in our series this fall have mentioned that the communication standards for 5G might take some of the frequencies that satellites are using now. Do you see this as a problem, or is this something that InfoStellar doesn't really affect your business?
I don't think so. I think we are building a platform that is one layer above the communication protocol that is being used. I think in Claha's slides, there was a mention of optical fiber too. Optical laser too. So when the technology develops and people started to use different ways to communicate with the satellite, I think our platform just uses that. So I don't think that will fundamentally affect our business in general.
Okay. And Dr. Cano, I'm going to put you on the spot because we put together this series this fall because it seemed to me that something is happening in Asia right now that is very much, in a way, almost leading innovation in this kind of development of businesses related to outer space. Can I ask you for your impressions about how Asia-wide the situation looks?
I think it looks very exciting, and it seems to be a driver that cannot be discounted. If we think of it strictly in venture capital firm in terms, and the firms that live and breathe venture capital, of course, Silicon Valley remains, and the whole ecosystem around it, and the Mojave Desert in California are driving so much of change in space industry. We see great leadership out of companies like the Airbus mothership in Europe. Strictly as a VC market, China is much smaller than Silicon Valley, but Japan is even smaller. So the question is why? But the why is that we see this as a system play, that we see all the changes and cultural shifts that James alluded to earlier out of that we see from the perspective of the VCs internationally, which is when I was a young engineer in Japan, my colleagues, if they were Japanese, they would go to a ministry or they would go to a large corporate. They would never think of doing the bold things that these guys have done. They would never have these dinner discussions with their parents. They would never get the backing of their professors to push them out in the world as a startup company. And what's fascinating, and I was recently on an extended visit in Beijing and Shenzhen, and having looked around there, we're looking at startup companies in Singapore and elsewhere in Asia. There is some of this same phenomenon. There is a desire to take extreme talent and quite novel ideas, maybe in part because people have not been hearing the same old story, and they are finding their way to a system and global and international discussion. And we see facilitating this discussion to the U.S., Europe, the rest of the world as a key role for venture capital at this time. So we see that there are extraordinary connections. So, for example, we look at a free space optics, a laser telecom solution with a startup that happens in one corner of Asia, The Airbus mothership, of course, has dozens, many more, focused on exactly these kinds of issues. But it may take a Naomi, a Dr. Kurahara, to say, maybe this belongs in our ecosystem. Maybe we don't have to wait for an Airbus to tell us it's a good idea. We can just make this interconnection and try to do it. Part of the most attractive background to Infostellar, which is really perhaps not unique to Infostellar, but emblematic of it, is Dr. Kurahara's own experience throughout Southeast Asia, Mongolia, Africa, connection to International Space University, bringing in a whole network solution and being able to kind of get to a beta testing of a real solution. I like the taste of it, is why I'm saying that. It is an opportunity to really drive something extraordinary that comes quite packaged. In venture capital terms, we saw this immediately as a quite mature Series A. A solid business plan, a cap table that worked, a chance to look at a real rollout of new technology built into the antenna module, built into the software that we saw as highly iterative and welcoming more partners. So as a platform of pent-up talent that's only in the pioneering days of being released, but behaves already as a mature microsystem, we see Japan and Asia as burgeoning, as having an incredibly important role in docking together with the stronger, longer, more established systems, quote unquote, because those systems are potentially going to see points of failure and disruption unless there is a docking point.
Okay, thanks very much, Louis. I'd like to move to audience Q&A. Brianna, could you pick the person and make sure they've got a mic? And while the mic is getting to the person with the first question, let me ask, Kurahara-san, why are you in Fukuoka this morning?
Sorry, I will attend a symposium in here.
Okay, and Fukuoka Institute of Technology was your original university, right?
Yes, Kyushu Institute of Technology, and it's my university.
Okay. Brianna, have we got a question? Not yet. Okay. Let me ask then another question about the kind of increase in the number of low Earth satellites. How do the low Earth satellites keep from contaminating each other? How do you avoid the problem with crosstalk with satellites? Joe, what would you say on that?
To confess, I know a lot about on the cloud side, and I know less about the radio frequency side. But at least right now, with the number of satellites we have on the lower Earth orbits, when we point our antenna at satellite, it's really rare to see another satellite overcrossing. They basically use different frequencies to avoid communications basically mixed. But I think this came up as part of our recent conversation that, especially for amateur satellites or other types of satellites, frequency range that people can use is quite limited. So as we have more number of satellites trying to use those frequency bands, I think at some point there needs to be some discussion on how we coordinate the distribution of this limited resource. And I don't know if it's already happening, actually. Probably could have knows more about that.
Kurahara-san, would you want to comment on that?
So the radio contamination?
Yeah.
Well, still it's okay for current numbers. Now I think about 1,400 satellites to 1,600 satellites are operational in orbit. And each of them has a very different intermediate intermediate frequencies. So we can separate, we can avoid contamination, and also the antenna has attached on antenna, usually it's tower to earth, ground. It doesn't tower to like the vertical. So that, and the antenna pattern has a limited shape, limited angle. So that also avoids the interference.
Which
I
is
don't know
okay
if-
with 1,500 satellites, but I'm hearing numbers that maybe within the next 5 or 10 years, there will be 6,000 to 9,000 low Earth satellites launched.
Yes. So we have to consider sharing the frequency, but it is already developed on ground. Imagine the mobile, 100 million of mobile sharing same frequency. So the technology is there. Just we have to bring the technology to the satellite.
And while I still have you, how far along is InfoStellar? Are you already to the stage of getting revenue, or are you still doing the more basic technology development? What kind of plan for actually having a commercial product or service?
So we will release our service early next year, first quarter. So the basic service is already developed, but we need to do more testing to provide like qualified service.
Okay. Brianna, thank you very much. Brianna, do we have a question from the floor?
Yes, can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
Good. I'd like to learn a little more about the opportunities for broadband from the International Space Station. I'd always presumed that NASA was providing that. What would your system improve on over what NASA currently has, and what opportunities do you see for broadband communications with the International Space Station?
Maybe that one is good for Dr. Konahara first.
The question is how our service can benefit to the ISS use.
Well, actually, the point is that ISS is already being considered as a platform to provide broadband service. What benefits does InfoStellar offer that ISS does not offer? And is there a possibility for cooperating with ISS?
Well, so our service is a ground side antenna. So actually, our service can be used to communicate with ISS. One thing I'm considering about ISS, the ISS has really, ISS can provide many testing experiment opportunities to scientists. However, there is a limitation about communication. So ISS use data relay satellite to send mission data or experimental data to ground. But it is limited because astronauts or life science or ISS maintenance data has more priorities to send ground. So the mission data, science data has a limited, narrow boundaries. So if ISS has own transmitter and its science data independently transferred to ground, we may have more science mission on ISS. So I think such opportunities our service can have.
Okay. No, thank you. I'd like to follow up, though. If or when InfoStellar becomes active and you're able to take this 97% idle time and use it more effectively, is that going to be sufficient for the number of satellites that are expected to be launched? Or will there still need to be a 5x increase in the number of ground stations?
It is very difficult to answer because the to calculate how many satellites we can operate, we need to know the satellite orbit. So to get precise estimation results, I need precise satellite orbit. Like Earth observation orbit or ISS orbit or any other like inclination or so. It is difficult to answer for now.
Well, go ahead. 100%.
Sorry. I think we're also emphasizing when we talk about a platform that it's an open platform. It's a platform that anyone can join. So we're kind of imagining a future where people think of installing antennas in their garden, for example, as an investment in place of doing, for example, solar panel installations. And with that, you get the money coming into your bank account every month. And in a world like that, I think we can definitely cover the growing number of satellites that is already happening.
So does Infostellar plan to get into the sort of business of either building ground stations or helping people to have a ground station kit to do this kind of thing?
Once we make the platform that is very easy for people to join, for example, if it's just a matter of plugging one little device to the antenna and make sure it's connected to the Wi-Fi network, and if that's all they have to do, without our support, we can see that starting with people who are excited about amateur radio communication, and also to the general public, that people are starting to invest on this.
Okay, thank you. What about another question from the floor? How are we doing?
Yeah, I've got a question. I was hoping you could tell us about Infostellar's, either their current customers or hypothetically who their customers might be, what kinds of companies they might be, what they're using Infostellar's service for, to try and give us a sense of the use case, the real power of the Infostellar technology.
Okay, so who would be the people who pay Infostellar? Would it be the satellite operators? Who would it be?
It is going to be the satellite operators. Mostly this growing number of commercial sectors that are running smaller low Earth orbit satellites. It is a sharing economy that we are trying to build. So there will be some influx of money flow from, for example, the satellite operators to the antenna holders. But the major revenue comes from people operating satellites.
I think that's one of the things that's quite exciting for us, is that we would see at the edge of an expanding customer sphere. So one for sure is existing antenna operators, people who own this infrastructure in the idle time and suddenly have the opportunity to make money for free, which is essentially what you offer them. At the same time, of course, it's displacing potentially a lot of satellite operations. So ground segment often consists of well-paid engineers. It might be 10 or a dozen to support a small constellation, who are constantly tracking orbit, picking communication points, and so on. One of the most elegant features of Infostellar's solution, we believe, is that it pushes the satellite operations network side and simplifies it so that almost anyone without deep specialization or tracking equipment is able to kind of move over the platform to be able to more intelligently manage their own satellites, and also use Infostellar's kind of mesh network of intelligent systems that sees 10 or a dozen satellites coming over the horizon and makes intelligent choices through the algorithm to be able to be very selective. And what that opens the door to, we would see, is anyone kind of becoming effectively a satellite operator. If you're a consumer data company with no satellite operations experience, maybe this is the gateway to getting more data in space. And then if I can just segue for a second, Dr. Dashich, to these questions around number of satellites and crosstalk and frequencies, it's happening rapidly on all fronts. So there is competition for spectrum. And at the same time, there is more and more data being intelligently handled. So, for example, if you're just in the kind of easier radio frequency spectrum and you're using small, cheap satellites to pick up ship locations at sea from radio beacons that were not intended for pickup from space, incredibly, there's quite high fidelity of the pickup and radio identification tagging of the ship signal, coupled with increasing distinguishing of which ship is which, even in very crowded areas, say here by the South China Sea, being able to distinguish signals. So that's rich data, even just in the radio frequency spectrum, UHF, what have you, that is providing both opportunity and challenge. So we see an explosion of data, of competition for spectrum allocation. We see a great opportunity for the non-professionals to come into this business of data from space via satellites, which just happens to be a piece of tin in the sky, really. It's just commoditizing. And there's Infostellar with this platform that actually can be graded up from UHFs to S-band to X-band to kind of consume this data across the intelligent platform, to play it to different players. The day will come when alternative solutions are needed, including the free space optics, line of sight, laser solutions. But you know what? Infostellar is going to work in that realm as well. So we see this as kind of the vanguard of a change that we really need to embrace. And I think the number of satellite projections that you put forward is probably modest.
It is.
And so we would see more and a great richness of opportunity, and it will take these kinds of what we would say as ground stations as a service kinds of solutions to be able to reach a wider range of customers, and we believe Infostellar is there amongst the very first.
Thanks. That's a great, appreciate the answer. Is there another question from the floor?
Yeah. Okay. So I have two questions to Dr. Pino. So I believe the big points of the venture capital to startup company may be a little different between the inside the space business and outside the business, outside space business. So what are your key points for deciding to invest space startup companies? This is the first question. And the second question is what kind of companies is your company interested in?
So thank you. Yes, it is. It has been unusual to see a specific focus in venture capital in the space business. There have been some notable pioneers from DFJ behind SpaceX to others, but our focus is, we believe, in tune firstly with the sense that this is a vast and acceleratingly near-term opportunity. So we see this strictly from if we were a pure VC, we would probably still give the answer that space is interesting. And you're seeing new space funds reaching out to new LPs to really approach space as just a proper VC bread and butter business. We, of course, are aware of and look to strategic impact on the mothership of Airbus. And deep space is an essential element of our investment thesis. And the two are converging very quickly. So we don't find it hard to build a case, typically in front of other VCs, why we're making investment in space. And we're excited that we have a number of co-investors and potential co-investors who are pure VCs who are coming along with us into the space business. What we look for specifically within our own thesis I alluded to before is typically we're alerted with interest when we see a combination of software and hardware. And when that combination is iterative and each improves the other, we can see better hardware coming out of the improved algorithm, taking new learning. And we see Infostellar as an example of a fast evolving algorithm that is making more sense of patterns of satellite, patterns of communication, the way it plays in the platform, how that can improve the antenna module, how the antenna module's improvements then allow more play to be able to pick up more information and drive more data. We see space in these days as a largely data-driven business and a data-driven opportunity. So we see space as an enabler of more data about Earth and in the deep space environment from Moon to Mars.
Thank you.
And I guess the last piece of that is we're totally looking for system play. So even as we are thinking about smaller satellites and the platforms that can support them in the ground segment, we're always interested in, well, how do those satellites get to space? So if there's a novel launch platform or system, something that drives costs down dramatically, then we're on it right away. So it's a combination of something that serves this acceleration of data capability plus the opportunity to lower costs.
So if I can kind of ask a question in the middle of this, one of the big kind of changes that you see in the last maybe 20 years is the shift that, space used to only be about government space programs. And now you are seeing more private sector activities in space. And a lot of the opportunities for value you're talking about are from the private sector. Are the governments that still operate ground stations basically in the way, or would they be good customers? How do you see the role of governments in the development of Infostellar? Maybe I can ask Dr. Kurahara for your comments on that one.
I'm sorry, Dr. Desai, how government?
A lot of ground stations are really operated by governments for government satellites. Do you think they will be motivated to be more efficient with their use of facilities, or are they just kind of in the way? Are you really counting on the private sector to drive your business, or will the government be a good customer?
Well, of course, our first customer will be private company. But in near future, I think the government will be a potential customer. For example, in Japan, last year or 2 years before, they just had a big satellite accident. The Earth observation satellite broke in space. What happened in space is when the satellite is back orbit, when satellite is unseen by operator, the satellite took wrong spin speed, and the spin got increased very much, and the satellite just broke down. So if the government said if they use more antennas and if they had more chance to monitor satellite, the accident may be avoided. And so there was such case. So I think that the government project may need our service.
That's a very good point, that while the ground station's not being used, also the satellite is out of communication, and lots of bad things can happen before it comes back around to the ground station. So, okay. Yeah, thanks.
And that also picks up as well on that sort of question about how we would view a VC business in space. Part of the answer is building a good interactive portfolio. So we've also invested in a small company that does an excellent job of radar tracking of very small objects in space. And I've sat in meetings with Dr. Kurahara and them together. It's lovely to facilitate and see the synergies amongst our portfolio companies. And whether it's because these are younger people used to using novel platforms, people who communicate with each other and keep their university and international university, space university and other networks, people who, in order to get things done, are just in touch with each other. And so we look for that too, and how and to tap into that kind of system acceleration that is so necessary for space and is probably ahead of larger corporates like our own mothership and even ahead of many government institutions. But we see this as a partnered process. Infostellar, one of the attractions too is that the company's early traction with critical government licensing for uplink and downlink is actually a strategic advantage. So the government still has a key role. And I think it will be a sort of private sector, public sector interplay for some time. But there is a unique and new and booming and large role for the private sector that has not been present before. And it's creating so many new novel opportunities at high rates of growth that it can't help but attract the venture capital sector. And I hope as VCs, we have something to contribute to the kinds of visions that Infostellar, Dr. Kurahara and her team are bringing. We see you in deep space, not just here on the ground segment in NERC.
Well, I have to say that one of the things that's really impressed me about putting this series together is what a kind of close-knit community the space industries have become or started out to be. Maybe this is because it is such a big challenge and it is such a kind of an early play. But yes, I think probably every speaker that I've asked knows most of my other speakers already in the series this fall. Do we have other questions from the floor?
Sure. I'm wondering why operate at the current layer that you're operating if you're going to have so many more customers in the future? Does it start to become more advantageous to just take all of the management and operate sort of satellite operation stuff that they do currently, bring that in-house and just sell kind of dial tone in space, guarantee uptimes, guarantee latencies, whatever you need to do? Why this layer now?
What you're talking about would involve Infostellar basically buying up the ground stations and actually running the ground stations, right?
Or not necessarily buying, but running, like MVNOs do on existing cellular networks in different countries.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Joe.
Thank you for that's a good question. I think but that's the end point that we're trying to get to. Like when we use internet nowadays, we don't really talk about ISPs or the fibers in between. When we communicate with satellite, we still talk about first acquiring the property to place antenna, changing the angle of the antenna at every second, pointing at the satellite, a lot of cables on the floor, a lot of expensive hardware sitting on the server rack, and maintaining all that is a lot of cost, as you can imagine. One thing that, as part of the Infostellar's business, what we are trying to do is to move a lot of what used to be happening on those hardwares to the cloud using technologies like something called software-defined radio, and get to a point where we have a really tiny hardware on the ground station side. So you have, you still need an antenna, but besides that, you don't have that many cables anymore. You have just teeniest device that you need to just plug into to the antenna. The angle of the antenna is automatically controlled by Stellar Station. That's the name of the product that we are trying to launch. Now, at that state, I think you can probably just leave that antenna and then go on a vacation without worrying about it. And I think everything should just work.
I think it is an excellent question. It is probably where we will see everything headed. So the phrase ground stations as a service is not an accident. I mean, that's a desire to attract customers to give them what they want, which is a data service, as opposed to come and look at our shiny new giant dish. So this business as an infrastructure is a tough one. So even for small pioneering satellite companies, small satellite companies, they still have to locate their antennas near a big data center. They have to negotiate a lease with the data center for security and stuff. It can take a year or two. They have to work out an agreement to hire somebody to pull the leaves out of the dish and keep it working. So the more that we can we can, as a business, approach customers and say, let us worry about that stuff because we're smoothing and streamlining it, making it smarter all the time. We can see the accelerating cost reductions. Let us bring that as a benefit to you. So we'll stop giving you a lecture about how beautiful our shiny hardware is and instead work out a contract with you that says we guarantee these levels of performance over time. And we've even baked in further cost reductions based on technology we haven't yet perfected because we can see it coming and where it will go. And this, we think, is a highly scalable business, one that extends beyond space, contributes to migrations of human space. More anthropologists should be looking at human migration to space. I was always a fan of Dr. Ben Finney and his work in Hawaii, looking at how Pacific migration might possibly lend some deeper thinking about what it means to build societies and civilizations in space. So keep asking those questions, and I think it's something for all of us to address in this system-type way that Infostellar is pioneering so well.
Great, thank you. Other questions from the floor? I think that maybe now is a good time for me to do a little bit of a wrap-up. I really appreciate Dr. Kurahara, Mr. Kawaguchi, Dr. Pino. I really appreciate you speaking with us this morning. This is a very interesting early stage, but very large opportunity. And that, I think, is something that we will definitely see more as these more inexpensive low Earth orbit satellites become more attractive as data sources or communication points. There are a number of different applications for these that we've been looking at, Earth observation, that kind of thing that's already other companies are starting to put satellites up for. It's been a real privilege to put on this series this time. I want to take just a minute and thank Brianna Burrows, the Assistant Director for the U.S. Asia Technology Management Center, and Pearl Yip, who is our course assistant, for great work that they've done throughout the quarter. Before we go any further, if you would, please join me in giving them a round of applause. And I also want to thank all of you for your interest in our topic, for your support by coming to the sessions. If you're watching by YouTube, I'd like to encourage you to go to our website, asia.stanford.edu, to see what we're doing now. And we would be very happy to follow up any kind of questions that you have from this series to the best way that we can. So next quarter, I will be teaching a regular course about Japanese business culture and systems. That's not on YouTube. And then in spring quarter, we come back to our public seminar series again with our regular series on entrepreneurship in Asian high-tech industries. So we hope you'll join us Tuesday afternoons at 4:30 in April and May to see more great startup companies from Asia. Yeah, please keep in touch. We'll always be happy to hear from you. Thanks very much, everybody. Thank you for a great presentation, Dr. Kurahara, Dr. Pino, and Mr. Kawaguchi. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll sign off for now.